Welcome to the San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. We are a spiritual community that welcomes all and sustains a green sanctuary. We promote personal and spiritual growth and work for a just, peaceful, and sustainable world. My name is Marcia Lovin, and I'm a proud member of San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. I would like to welcome you with the words of Jeff May. Come, gather, not into a common space, sharing a physical closeness we long for, precluded by wise choice, but come together in this common time and common space. We need to be together. We yearn for connection. We hunger for the familiar faces of friends, the sound of shared voices proclaiming who we are, where we are going, that which resonates with our hopes, our dreams, and our values. Come, gather. We are here in this space made of all spaces, and we share our becoming in this moment. To find out more about our congregation, visit www.sangabrieluu.org. And to find out more about Unitarian Universalists, visit www.uua.org. Please enjoy our service today.
A chalice lit in our midst is a symbol of our liberal faith, a faith built on the foundations of freedom, reason, and welcome, a faith sustained by acts of kindness and justice, a faith that envisions a world flourishing with equality for all people, a faith that demands the living out of goodness, a faith that requires thoughtfulness, a faith of wholeness. This tiny light is the symbol of the spark of all this within each of us.
Welcome to a Sunday morning service at San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Whatever day you may be viewing this service, whether this is your first time with us or one of your first times, or you are a long-time member or friend of this congregation, you are welcome here. I am Reverend Sandra Ingham, this congregation's interim minister. The title of my reflections today is Those Troubling Transcendentalists. As I asked in this week's newsletter, who were the Transcendentalists? In what way were they troubling? What do they have to do with Unitarian Universalism? And why do we, or should we, care about them as we approach the middle of the 21st century? You could say that the opening hymn was a definition of Transcendentalism in a nutshell. The words to the hymn were written by Ralph Waldo Emerson, the most famous Transcendentalist. More to say about that in a few minutes. You may have learned somewhere along the way in your educational path that the Transcendentalists loved nature. That actually may be the only thing that you ever learned about the Transcendentalists, or at least the only thing that you remember. And that is true. They were into nature, as we might say today, but there was much more to them and their movement than this high regard for nature. That is what the first verse of We Sing of Golden Mornings, the opening hymn, is all about. But that second verse, that one is all about individualism and hope and optimism, because we can build a better world. So that second verse is also about community and creating heaven on earth for everyone, because everyone is equal. Everyone, according to the Transcendentalists, has a spark of divinity in them. We do not need intermediaries such as God, Jesus, ministers, rabbis to find divinity. We can find divinity on our own, perhaps particularly in nature. There you have it. Maybe all you ever need to know, so you can tune out right now. And of course, I'm joking. I hope that you won't. The opening words were written by Walt Whitman, and they are in the back of our larger hymnal. And you may recognize this from your high school or even college days. Song of the Open Road. Afoot and light-hearted I take to the open road, healthy, free, the world before me. Henceforth I ask not good fortune. I myself am good fortune, strong and content. I travel the open road. I inhale great draughts of space. The east and the west are mine, and the north and south are mine. All seems beautiful to me. I can repeat over to men and women, you have done such good to me. I would do the same to you. Whoever you are, come travel with me. However sweet these laid up stores, however convenient this dwelling, we cannot remain here. However sheltered this port, and however calm these waters, we must not anchor here. Together, the inducements shall be greater. We will sail pathless and wild seas. We will go where winds blow, waves dash, and the Yankee clipper speeds by under full sail. Forward after the great companions, and to belong to them. They, too, are on the road. Onward to that which is endless, as it was beginningless, to undergo much. Tramps of days, rests of nights, to see nothing anywhere but what you may reach it and pass it, to look up or down, no road, but it stretches and waits for you, to know the universe itself as a road, as many roads, as roads for traveling souls. So wrote Mr. Whitman in the mid-1800s. I invite you now to join with Diane Dancer, a member of this congregation, in reading the words of San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship's Affirmation. These words express the covenant that the members and friends of this congregation have with each other. And the words should appear on your screen.
Please join as we read in unison our affirmation. The doctrine of this church is love. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other.
Here is Karina now, our Director of Religious Education, with the Wonder Box and today's story for all ages. Good morning, or afternoon, or evening to you, Karina. I am wondering what might be in the Wonder Box this time.
Good morning, San Gabriel. It's wonderful to be with you today. I've got a Wonder Box with me. Let's see. It's always great to share our perspectives with each other and listen to one another. That's how we help each other learn and grow. What do you think might be in here? Aloud. Let's open it up and see. Did you tell someone near you what you guessed? It's a clock. Clock, all about measuring time. And even though clocks measure time in regular increments, like seconds or minutes or hours, time can feel fast or slow, depending on what you're doing or how you're feeling. And I've got a story about that today. It's called
Henry Hikes to Fitchburg, written and illustrated by D.B. Johnson. One summer day, Henry and his friend decided to go to Fitchburg to see the country. "I'll walk," said Henry. "It's the fastest way to travel." "I'll work," Henry's friend said, "until I have the money to buy a ticket to ride the train to Fitchburg. We'll see who gets there first." His friend waved. "Enjoy your walk." Henry walked down the road to Fitchburg. "Enjoy your work," he called back. Henry's friend filled the wood box in Mrs. Alcott's kitchen. 10 cents. Henry hopped from rock to rock across the Sudbury River. His friend swept out the post office. 5 cents. Henry carved a walking stick. 25 miles to Fitchburg. Henry's friend pulled all the weeds in Mr. Hawthorne's garden. 15 cents. Henry put ferns and flowers in a book and pressed them. His friend painted the fence in front of the courthouse. 10 cents. Henry walked on stone walls. Henry's friend moved the bookcases in Mr. Emerson's study. 15 cents. Henry climbed a tree. 18 miles to Fitchburg. His friend carried water to the cows grazing on the grass in town. 5 cents. Henry made a raft and paddled up the Nashua River. Henry's friend cleaned out Mrs. Thoreau's chicken house. 10 cents. Henry crossed a swamp and found a bird's nest in the grass. 12 miles to Fitchburg. His friend carried flour from the mill to the village baker. 20 cents. Henry found a honey tree. Henry's friend ran to the train station to buy his ticket to Fitchburg. 90 cents. Henry jumped into a pond. 7 miles to Fitchburg. His friend sat on the train in a tangle of people. Henry ate his way through a blackberry patch. Henry's friend got off the train at Fitchburg Station just as the sun was setting. Henry took a shortcut, 1 mile to Fitchburg. His friend was sitting in the moonlight when Henry arrived. "The train was faster," he said. Henry took a small pail from his pack. "I know," he smiled. "I stopped for blackberries." The end.
In this book, Henry is a bear, but in real life, he was Henry David Thoreau, and he wrote about hiking to Fitchburg in his book, Walden. Thoreau was a member of the Transcendentalist movement, and he greatly valued time spent outdoors, time in nature. Reverend Sandy is preaching today about the Transcendentalists and their influence on our faith. For me, it helps to remember how important it is to be able to choose how we spend our time in a culture that tells us our worth is measured by how productive we are. I hope everyone, every day, gets some time to spend as they wish, no matter your age. We'll talk more about that in RE time today. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Karina, for that story, which gives us, all of us, no matter our age, another way of trying to understand the Transcendentalists. Right now, I invite everyone to enjoy and appreciate today's musical interlude. And please note that because we cannot pass the offering plates while our services continue to be online only, there will be information during this interlude about how to give to the fellowship. And that information will be repeated during the postlude.
If I were an angel with lovely white wings, I'd watch over you. I'd tell you a story of princes and kings, and stars and shepherds too. I'd tell you that this is the holiest night, the holiest night of the year. For Jesus is born in a manger so low, and all who are searching draw near.
I were an angel with halo so bright, I'd light up your way. I journey with you through the dark of the night, your sun delivered the day. I show you the place where the baby is born, where love is the kingdom to come, and all of the people who gather around will know on this day we are one. If I were an angel, I'd sing you a song of peace on the earth. I'd sing of the places where children belong and know their special worth. I'd sing of the babe in a stable so bare, a baby so meek and so mild, who gives us the hope that the love we find here will grow in the heart
you, musicians, as always. Take a moment now, all of you, to center yourselves as we have a time of silence and meditation. I'm going to stick with the Transcendentalists for all of our readings. So this one was written by Henry David Thoreau, the star of our Story for All Ages, titled To Live Deliberately. Why should we live in such a hurry and waste of life? We are determined to be starved before we are hungry. I wish to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life. I wish to learn what life has to teach, and not, when I come to die, discover that I have not lived. I do not wish to live what is not life. Living is so dear. Nor do I wish to practice resignation, unless it is quite necessary. I wish to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life. I want to cut a broad swath, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. If it proves to be mean, then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it and publish its meanness to the world. Or, if it is sublime, to know it by experience and to believe and to be able to give a true account of it. To know the universe itself as a road, as many roads, as roads for traveling souls, wrote Walt Whitman. And Thoreau declares that he wishes to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life. I want to cut a broad swath, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. And if it proves to be mean, then to get the whole and genuine meanness of it and publish its meanness to the world. Or if it is sublime, to know it by experience and to be able to give a true account of it. I don't know about you, but when I read Whitman, especially in college, I think, as an undergraduate, not high school, and the Song of the Open Road, and the traveling with the companions, and I am the confident one. It's all about me. Oh boy, did that speak to an adolescent. Because it is all about me, right? Unfortunately, many of us still have not quite grown out of that stage, but that's a subject for another day. So when you think about these quotes from Whitman and Thoreau and Emerson and Margaret Fuller in a little bit, that's pretty gutsy thinking, if you really pay attention to it. Having the courage to want to know everything about life, the meanness of the world, and or the sublimity, the beauty of the world. That's all they wanted, those transcendentalists of the 1800s, to live life to the fullest possible extent that they could. But did that mean to improve themselves, to live as rugged, stubborn individualists? Or did it mean to live as communal people, working to end oppression and repair the brokenness of the world? Yes, I just asked you an or question, and the answer is yes, it meant both. They didn't all achieve both of these goals, but they aimed for those goals. I'm not quite sure how it happened that Transcendentalism became so complicated, not straightforward. I think part of the problem is their name is too long, a little bit like what we talked about last week with Unitarian Universalism. Well, I take that back, though. I do know a little bit about how it happened that we think Transcendentalism is complex and complicated. The Transcendentalists did it to themselves in many ways. Partly, this had to do with the way that language was used in the 1800s, and I'll probably say a little bit about that in a few minutes. But we can't ignore the fact that the Transcendentalists were, well, full of themselves. They were highly educated. They loved to converse. They had the money to do that, to live lives of pretty much leisure. I am a huge fan of Margaret Fuller, who, in my humble opinion, should be the most famous Transcendentalist. But I try not to recommend her original writings, her works. The language, the obscure words, the flowery sentence structures, though not familiar to us references, all of that makes it difficult for 21st century minds to comprehend, work through, and find the relevance to our lives today. And Emerson, oh my, am I the only one who was more or less forced to read Emerson in high school or college? And then there he was again in seminary before I really knew and understood who Margaret Fuller was and what her significance is. I am supposed to be reading not only Emerson, but practically worshiping his words, and this in the mid-1990s. Who were the Transcendentalists? Who did they think they were? For one thing, they were almost all Unitarians, especially at the beginning of the movement in the late 1820s and early 1830s. Of course, the Transcendentalists didn't just appear out of the blue. They did not formulate ideas overnight and then announce them suddenly in the local paper. Oh, let's be Transcendentalists today. No, like any group of people who advocate for a supposed new way of thinking, the Transcendentalists arrived at certain ideas and conclusions about humanity and human nature after learning about them from other people and places. In this case, in American Transcendentalism, they were strongly influenced by European philosophers and scholars, most importantly by those Europeans engaging in biblical criticism, which was all the rage in the 1800s, and especially German philosophers. These German writers and others who were doing what became known as capital H, higher, capital C, criticism, higher criticism of the Bible, capital B, wrestled with the dilemma of whether or not every word in the Bible was the literal truth handed down from God. Common sense seemed to indicate otherwise. And how could all the words in that book be literally true? There is one German philosopher whom we probably should try to at least name for that quiz I'll give you later. Immanuel Kant, or Kant. The word transcendental came from Kant's idealism, and that was eventually used with a capital I in most of the sources I used. In their book, An Introduction to the Unitarian and Universalist Traditions, Andrea Greenwood and Mark Harris tell us that in his idealism, Kant taught that humans understand the universe through transcendental forms. All transcendental means is going beyond usual limits or boundaries. And these transcendental forms are inherent in the mind, inherent in the gut. This is really important to an understanding of Transcendentalism. Unitarian minister Frederick Henry Hedge was the first American to use the word Transcendentalist in print, and that was in 1833. But as usual, it was a woman who actually made the word popular. Elizabeth Palmer Peabody used that word in a letter that she wrote to someone in 1826 before Hedges using it. But that letter never got published separately. Elizabeth Peabody was everywhere during this period of time. A most amazing woman. She lived from 1804 to 1894. She was 90 years old. Now, why does that name sound familiar? Think kindergarten. She established the first kindergarten in this country, and it was in Boston. In Hinduism, Emerson found affirmation for the idea that there is a fundamental unity to all human experience. You might remember that from your school days, Emerson's use of the phrase oversoul. The idea that all humans know about this fundamental unity we share. That is, all of us are capable of knowing this more accurately, capable of intuiting it because it's inherent within us. We know certain things, we just know them in our heart of hearts. And this idea of the oversoul, that there's a fundamental unity, doesn't that sound suspiciously like the interdependent web? What I think Kant and then Emerson were working through is this: we simply know some things from birth onward. We might not access them, we might not know that we know them, but we do. The essence of what it means to be a person is difficult to put into words, which did not stop the Transcendentalists from trying to put this somewhat vague philosophy, this strange new way of thinking, into words. But it wasn't anything really new. This happens over and over and over again in human history. Thinking about so-called old ideas in new ways. Perhaps, to be more accurate, we should call these enduring truths and ideas, universal truths that throughout history get squashed over and over and over again, and then they get brought out again, rediscovered, sometimes with a new name, like Transcendentalism. Every source I used for these reflections began with some variation of this. The roots of the Transcendentalist movement are complex, confusing, and or obscure. And then that resource would almost always go on to say that even the Transcendentalists themselves could be confusing and obscure, which has always been one of my major problems with Emerson. When Charles Dickens visited this country, the Transcendentalist movement was well underway. Dickens, of course, wanted to know what exactly did Transcendentalism mean? And he was given to understand, and this is a quote from him, that whatever was unintelligible would be certainly transcendental. Contemporary historian, contemporary of that time, Henry Adams said that the Transcendentalists were unutterably funny. They were out to transform the world, though they didn't quite know what this meant or how they would go about it. They did not like the direction that America was taking in the mid-1800s, too much materialism and too great a tendency to be an insular nation, not to mention heading towards a civil war. By now, I hope that you're becoming aware of the tensions and the struggles for balance going on among the Transcendentalists. And those same struggles and tensions were apparent in the larger American society, and those same tensions and struggles go on today. The tension between ourselves, just being a person, of rugged individuals, and society, contributing to the common good, working to fix the broken world. You might think that Margaret Fuller and Henry David Thoreau favored improvement. I'm giving you this illustration as one way of illustrating how difficult it is to peg them, to put them into holes. So you might think that Fuller and Thoreau favored improvement of the self over improvement of the wider world. Well, I'll tell you a little bit more about Fuller in a minute. But it was hard to tell about Thoreau. Ultimately, he probably preferred working on the self. He was an introvert, probably. But he couldn't ignore the issue of slavery. Thoreau was eminently practical, though one might wonder how eminently practical a person was if they spent the entire day walking to Fitchburg when you could get there more quickly on a train. I think that was in today's children's story. Thoreau was practical enough to avoid the communal farms like Brook Farm, Fruitland, and Hart's, and some other ones. Some say we, Unitarians, Universalists, gather to build community, but only this particular community, here like SGEUF, and to improve ourselves. Some say we gather to improve the world by strengthening our resolve to mend the brokenness in our world through social justice action. There's so much brokenness, and what a world, wars, prisons in need of so much reform, and mistreatment of Native Americans, and the fear of immigrants, terrorism, the rights of women, the abuse of people anywhere affects us, the misunderstanding of mental illness, the clamor, the emphasis on material things and on making money, the dismissal of music, art, and dance, the distrust of the emotions, the disregard of feelings, technology vying for our constant attention, the old versus the new, old ways of thinking. Oh, did you think I was talking about our world in December of 2020? No, I am talking about the world of the Transcendentalists in the 1800s. It does present us with a world full of opportunities, certainly, when we acknowledge our oneness, our unity. So Transcendentalist ideas were not new. They were what we might call, as I said earlier, universal truths that resurface periodically in human history until they get distorted, trampled on, often brutally so. There is something new, though, that the Transcendentalists gave us. In the words of David Robinson in his book, The Unitarians and the Universalists, Transcendentalism stands at the turning point in American life when moral questions began to resolve themselves into political ones. Think about that. Moral questions began to resolve themselves into political ones. I think this has gotten more accented in our country. Moral issues are always an issue in the politics of today. Is it good or bad to have moral questions part of politics? I don't think you can separate the two. We probably should try. The Transcendentalists bequeathed to us two beliefs that we Unitarian Universalists take for granted today. One, people have divinity within. Each person has a divine spark. And two, each one of us intuitively knows what the truth is. And I use the word truth with a capital T. We just know certain things in our gut. Unitarian Universalists today in the 21st century, well, we rarely think about these two truths or beliefs. We take them for granted, but they are still controversial statements in some parts of this country and this world. But you have to understand, with all of the controversies in our history, both Unitarian and Universalist, they became just part of what we believe. The humanist crisis, the humanist controversy. We're almost all humanists now. The Transcendentalist ideas and beliefs, we don't even think about them. They're just part of who we are. So there's that balance beam of tensions among Transcendentalists. The soul, the individual self on one hand, and society and the commune on the other hand. Some Transcendentalists emphasize the unity of humankind and stressed cooperation rather than individualism as the key to social improvement. Orestes, I really don't know how to say his first name, Orestes, Brownson is a Transcendentalist you probably never heard of. He began his professional career as a Unitarian minister and he ended it as a Catholic. He was raised as a Presbyterian but found Universalism while still a young man. Well, Brownson is important to us today because of his persistent advocacy for the working class. Brownson thought the complete opposite of what Emerson was preaching. Brownson was a socialist, a communist in the early 1930s and 40s. And speaking of communism, small c, George Ripley's name might be familiar to some of you. He started the Brook Farm community. Louisa May Alcott's father, Amos Bronson, started Fruitlands, another experimental communist, small c, would-be utopian community. You could say that these communities failed, but the mere fact that they existed for a while and that humans could even conceive of such experiments is a success of sorts, I think. The Transcendentalists believe that we have to stop thinking of the other as the other and recognize and acknowledge our oneness, our unity. And knowing that you have a divine spark, and you do, and I do, and everyone does, would lead to the end of slavery, the end of poverty, to a place where all would receive free education and thus reach their full human potential. A world in which if you are as divine and special and holy as I am, it doesn't matter if you are mentally ill or what color your skin is. All will be well. By the middle of the 1800s, Transcendentalist ideas were becoming more and more accepted, though not exactly mainstream, except perhaps among Unitarians and probably the Universalists too. So much of their energies went into the anti-slavery fight. After the Civil War, the pendulum swung to Emerson's side, the pendulum between self and society. As Philip Gura says in his book, American Transcendentalism, the uneasy balance between the parties of self and of society tipped in the direction of the former, the self, whose philosophy supported individual rights and market capitalism rather than humanitarian socialism. In other words, Emerson's self-reliance became the paramount part of Transcendentalism in our national consciousness. And we could, I think, make a very good case that this is still true. Think NRA, National Rifle Association, for example. Of course, the Transcendentalists on the other end of the spectrum, the society end, did not just fade away. Consider the story of William Batchelor Green, who lived from 1819 to 1878. He was a very good example, although he's not very well known, of working for societal change. He didn't like the Calvinist Presbyterian version of humanity, so he became, like Brownson, a champion of the working class. Green believed that equal amounts of labor should receive equal pay, whether a man was doing that work or a woman. That was pretty radical for the mid to late 1800s. He also believed that mutual love was the only response to the inevitable strife that the Industrial Revolution created, and that as soon as one made his own private enjoyment the main end of life, both the harmony of the universe and the unity of the human race shattered into as many fragments as there were individual men, and these fragments repelled each other, for each was intensely selfish, and each cared for his own and not for the common good. I think he was on to something that is still meaningful and important. Dorothea Dix lived from 1802 to 1887, and you will probably know that name. She ran away from home at age 12. She started a school at age 14. She was influenced by William Channing. He suggested that she start a class for poor children, and that eventually led to her teaching in prisons. And so many people there were mentally ill. Well, you know, I hope what that led to. She had found her life's work. Caroline Healy Dom lived from 1822 to 1912. At age 19, she was a participant in Margaret Fuller's Conversations, and she said of an 1841 gathering about mythology that she never had enjoyed anything as much. Caroline Healy Dahl was abandoned by her husband in 1855, but in Calcutta. And she was left there with the children. She became a writer and a lecturer. She was, as all of the Transcendentalists were, way ahead of her time. She wrote about the complex connections among systems of education, labor, and law that kept women subordinate. She was too radical for Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And now we come to my favorite Transcendentalist, Margaret Fuller. It seems sacrilegious of me to allot her only a few minutes in these reflections. I've done several services about Fuller in other congregations, not here. Your homework, you didn't think I'd stop giving homework, did you? Just because I'm almost at the end of my tenure with you? No, your homework, and this will take you a while, is to learn about her. Here's a book. You could start with this book. Do you see how big this book is? And the print is tiny. Oh, let's see. It's oh my goodness, it's over 600 pages. This is volume 2. This one is Margaret Fuller, The Public Years. Volume 1 is Margaret Fuller, The Private Years. Margaret Fuller, born in 1810 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, raised a Unitarian. Her father was a United States Senator for 24 years who doted on her. Here's a quote from a letter he wrote to Margaret's mother. "Tell Margaret I love her if she learns to read." That turned out to be both a blessing and a curse for Margaret. Margaret read and read and read, and she got an education that usually only males got at that time in this country. Margaret was extremely intelligent. She could read at age 3. She knew Latin by age 4. She was shocking proper society by the time she was 13 because of her outspokenness, her forthright opinions, and her not so great manners. She was so not reserved, and you were supposed to be a reserved young woman. How would she ever find a husband, wondered her parents. This was not at the top of Margaret's list of things to do, but she was sent off to Miss Prescott's school for young ladies, which didn't do much good other than to cause her to keep her intelligence and her boundless reading habits hidden for a while. And then she went back to Cambridge at age 16 and became known as a great conversationalist. She had close friendships with many of the big names in Transcendentalism, including Emerson. She was a close friend of Emerson's, and it turns out that a lot of Emerson's work was probably actually Margaret Fuller's, or at least inspired by her. She was brilliant, charming, funny, witty, intense, and ever and always misunderstood. Most young men were more than a little frightened of her. One day, Fuller had what can only be called a religious experience. She describes it in terms that sound more Buddhist than Christian. Margaret wrote, and she wrote a lot, "I saw that there was no self, that selfishness was all folly, and the result of circumstance, that it was only because I thought the self real that I suffered, that I only had to live in the idea of the all, capital A, the all, and all was mine. This truth came to me, and I received it unhesitatingly, so that I was for that hour taken up into God, the universal. And this was not some form of resignation. On the contrary, the experience led to empowerment, to a deeper religious acceptance of life in both its joys and its sorrows, and of herself as a vital part of the divine life." So in her writing at this point, she wrote, "I accept the universe, capital U," to which Emerson's friend Thomas Carlyle commented, "By God, she'd better." Fuller was often mistaken as some sort of egoist because she was not a conventional, demure 19th century woman. Eventually, Margaret started a group of a discussion group called The Conversations, and many, many women attended it, although it was frowned upon by many, many other women. And Margaret Fuller became a member of Emerson's Transcendentalist Circle, and then she became editor of the Journal of Transcendentalism, which was called the Dahl. And in that journal, Margaret Fuller wrote the first major articles about women's issues. It was the first treatment of women's issues to be published ever in America. And then she turned that into a book titled Women in the 19th Century. Margaret's ability to identify with others was deepened through those conversations. And then later, Margaret became a writer for Horace Greeley, that name again, for his New York Tribune. And Margaret was a pioneering investigative reporter. She uncovered poor conditions in local asylums and in jails and in other institutions, and then she went to Europe as a foreign correspondent for the New York Tribune. And it just happened, and of course she was the first female foreign correspondent, well, at least for the Tribune. She might have been the first one, period. So she went to Italy, and what was happening in Italy in 1848? Revolution. And while she was there, she met a young Italian revolutionary, the Marchese d'Ossola. He fought for Garibaldi and the Roman Republic, and Fuller ran a hospital while there, and she had their child, Angelina. They probably never married, Margaret and Ossola. In 1850, when the Italian Revolution fell apart, Ossola and Margaret and the child, Angelino, decided to sail for New York. But the ship got stuck on some kind of sandbar or something off Fire Island, and Margaret Fuller, her husband, and this infant son all drowned. Fuller's body was never recovered. She was only 40 years old. So that's Margaret Fuller, a tiny snippet about her. But her life, remember this if you don't remember the details, her life nicely illustrates the possibility of being self-absorbed and improving oneself, while at the same time trying to improve society. And Margaret Fuller realized that these were not contradictions, that you could improve both the self and society, and that to live a full life, you had to tackle both of these challenges. When she was a writer for Greeley's newspaper, the New York Tribune, she wrote, "If charity begins at home, it must not end there, but rather extend to the great circle of humanity." And she extended her humanity to prisoners at Sing Sing, among other places, to her concerns with people who lived on the streets and in the almshouses in New York City. She took on the economic and social conditions that were, as much as she put it, as much of a problem as skin color and of gender, if not more so. Most of these transcendentalists lived through the Civil War, yet they continued to believe that people could change, that the world could become a better, fairer place if they could keep these hopes and dreams and aspirations alive through a period as horrendous as the Civil War. We, too, should be able to keep on keeping on. Did transcendentalism fail? No. I think that would be an unfair judgment to make. No matter how utopian and idealistic they were, much of what they struggled to achieve is now a reality. I don't mean just the theological reforms, at least within some faith traditions such as ours. I mean the end of slavery in this country and in other parts of the world. Perhaps the Transcendentalists lost some battles, but did they lose the war? The war to create a fully egalitarian humanity, as they put it. Well, they said egalitarian brotherhood, but I'm going to change that to humanity. No. We have had the civil rights struggle ongoing, but we've had it. The gay rights movement, women's rights movements, the battle for immigrants to be treated better. All of this I see as proof that the Transcendentalists have not lost the war, at least not yet. And now it is our turn, obviously. And obviously, too, we have a long way still to go. And we are not by any means finished with the civil rights movement, certainly, or a lot of these other movements. We have not been successful at eradicating racism, not even close, but we're in a new window of opportunity to do that. And the Transcendentalists are probably smiling somewhere. I find it encouraging and energizing and uplifting to look back at what our spiritual ancestors faced and how they dealt with the problems of their times. Perhaps they lost some battles, but maybe a new manifestation is at hand if we would just wake up. How can I keep from singing when I can claim such people as the Transcendentalists as my spiritual ancestors? Please join me in singing the closing hymn, which is one of my favorite hymns, My Life Flows On in Endless Song.
As we extinguish the light of this chalice, let us remember these words by Barbara Merritt. Unitarian Universalists have said for centuries that there is room in our religion for all seekers. Skeptics and poets and scientists are welcome here, as are the nonconformists and shy and uncertain folk. We believe that restlessness and doubts are a sign of grace, that the love of truth is the holiest of gifts.
The closing words are those of Margaret Fuller. and they're titled A New Manifestation. I don't usually recommend that people read Margaret Fuller's original writings because her words are obscure and the language is flowery. This was a problem with anything that comes out of the 1800s. Emerson's writing is a very good example. Unfortunately, Margaret Fuller's is also that way. Obscure words, flowery phrases, references that we don't understand. So read that great big book that I showed you a few minutes ago. It's by Charles Capper. Capper, C-A-P-P-E-R. And both those volumes should keep you occupied for the rest of the pandemic. So here are Margaret's words. A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come when man and woman may regard one another as brother and sister, able both to appreciate and to prophesy to one another. A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come. What woman needs is not as a woman to act or rule, but as a nature to grow, as intelligence to discern, as a soul to live freely and unimpeded, to unfold such powers as were given her. A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come. Man does not have his fair share either. His energies are repressed and distorted by the interposition of artificial obstacles. A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come. We would have every arbitrary barrier thrown down. We would have every path laid open to woman as freely as to man. Were this done, we believe a divine energy would pervade nature to a degree unknown in the history of former ages. A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come. May it be so. Amen. Blessed be.